My parents died when I was pretty young, and my mother died when I was 7, and my father when I was 10. And even before that, I remember flying in I think it was a plane called a Skywalker, I want to say. Just a family friend or something like that, you know. And when I went live with my cousins after my parents passed away, uh, my cousin had just moved up to Alaska. This was 1982. It was the year that President Reagan fired all the controllers, and he was one of the replacements that was hired. So I ended up living in Alaska, which, you know, is aviation mecca. I mean, people up their planes, like, we use cars, you know. Every one of them even have a pilot certificate. But it's some of the only ways you can get to certain locations is with an aircraft. So, you know, I had that going for me. And my cousin was an air traffic controller. So I used to hang around the Anchorage Center facility, which was on Elmendorf Air Force Base. I'd go onto the base, I'd go into the facility, I'd be around controllers. And my cousin was a pilot as well, a private pilot. So I'd go flying with him, and I'd get to see Alaska from that perspective. So that was kind of what started me on that road. I remember I used to subscribe to Flying Magazine, and I was, loved to read it even as a kid. And then I got into school, college, and you don't have as much time, but it always kind of was in the back of my head. Once after I got out of college, I had the time, and there was a span in my life where I also had the money. And so I did it. I figured, what the heck, I'll try it, you know? And I loved it. I mean, I took to it like a fish to water. And the place where I learned to fly, in fact, they don't let you solo. Nobody solos until you've done spin training.
Okay.
So you have to do spins, right turns, left turns, you know, not just classroom theory, but actual spins in the aircraft, be able to recover more or less on heading, things like that. So you get introduced to aerobatics. They have a big aerobatic school there. And that's where it started for me. And I didn't plan on doing it as a career. I didn't think I would get thousands of hours, but I just loved it, you know. And after I finished my certificate, they give you a free aerobatics as a little thank you. So I did that. I loved it. I got into taking an aerobatic course, and I bought an aircraft. I started flying. I got my instrument rating. I did some volunteering. I never the passion for me never really went away. In fact, the reason I became a professional pilot is because it got so expensive owning an aircraft and flying that I came to a fork in the road where I had to decide either I'm going to cut back on my flying or I'm going to have to find some way to make it pay. So I got my instructor rating. I learned to fly seaplanes. I started flying aerobatics, teaching aerobatics. I got my glider rating, and I just expanding. That's what I love about flying. There's always something new to be learned, to be experienced, not just from the mechanical side or the aircraft side, but there's new places to travel, new people to meet. And I think that's really one of the great things about aviation for me, is all the people that I've met. It just wouldn't be the same without the people. Even if you kept the airplanes and you kept everything else about it, if you remove the people, same. So that's kind of where I came to me in it, and it's all what I love about it today. It's meeting people, and that's why, you know, I have my website where I talk a lot about aviation, and I've made a lot of friends through that, through words, fly-ins, you name it. So actually, Paul Berezny recently talked about that, where actually people who were memorializing him talked about how for him it was always, you know, that was what his passion was in aviation. That's what driving him forward. And for me, it's just the same thing, really. It's what I love about teaching. It's what I love about flying on the Gulf Stream. You know, you meet interesting passengers. You go to different countries, and there's just so much to be learned from the human side. So much to be experienced.
Yeah. When you look at student pilots, when you look at student pilots today and compare it to student pilots 20 years ago, is there a difference?
I think there is a bit of a difference. This is a general, of course, because you can't fit every pilot into the same round hole, if you know what I mean. But I would say that over the past 20, from when I started learning how to fly, the main thing that's different is it's gotten a lot more expensive. I got my private pilot certificate in 1998, 97 or 98, I forget now, but it cost me about $4,000. Now at that same FBO at the same airport, the same certificate's going to cost you more like $14,000. The
Yeah.
price goes up, it changes the character of the average person that comes in. They've got to be wealthier. And so what happens is, like I said, when I learned how to fly, I had both the time and the money. I didn't realize at the time what a great luxury that was. But now when I look back on it, especially as an instructor, I see people come in and they have one of two things. They have the time, but not the money, which usually the younger people, or they have plenty of money, but very little time. And you
Yeah.
need both resources to fly. So what I find is it's becoming a little more lopsided now. I'm finding it's attracting people who have the money, but not necessarily the time. Also,
Yeah.
the regulatory burden is greater than it used to be. The airplanes are more complex. When I learned to fly, I was in a standard 172, built back in the 70s. It had no glass, anything, no GPS. It was
Yeah.
relatively simple. Nowadays, people are learning sources and time and airplanes with G1000 panels that technology that we don't even have in the Gulfstream, really. Some really sophisticated things, but you pay a price for it, and it extends the amount of time it takes to learn, because when you go for that check ride, any equipment in that airplane is fair game. The instructor or the examiner can ask you about any of it, and you do. So I find that when I'm training people in those more complex airplanes, it just takes a little longer.
Hmm.
I do see a lot of people going back to the conventional landing gear aircraft, the tail wheels, and that's a big passion of mine, is tail wheel flying. You'll see people learning to fly in Cubs and in just real planes, Champs, Citabrias. Those were out of vogue for a lot of I'd say in the 80s, and even to come back. I think people are realizing that when it comes to flying, the most important part is rudder skill. It's that feel. It's knowing about uh, having that angle of attack awareness and the basic stick and rudder skills that you sometimes see lacking, even people who are flying very large aircraft. So the tail wheel helps put a lot of that skill into the pilot, and I think there's a so I see it going in both directions. It's interesting. So if I was going to give advice to someone who's wanting to learn how to fly these days, I would say two things. I would say go for a tail wheel and try and find the simplest airplane you can. It gets all the distractions away from you, and those airplanes are less expensive. I mean, a Citabria will rent, far less expensive than even a 172, at least here in the States. So, plus they're just a lot of fun.
Do you think that people nowadays have the same sort of fun when they learn to fly as they had yesterday?
I think that's an excellent question. I think in some ways they do, because the planes today are quite capable. I mean, there are a lot of airplanes out there that can be used for road travel. We have a lot of tools like de-icing systems and GPS. You don't have to worry about getting lost. We have much better tools for determining the weather, for example, en route. We have all sorts of tracking systems. The technology is good and bad, but the good is it helps take some of the burden off the pilot. It can make it a little easier and make the flying a little more enjoyable. But on the flip side, I think the high cost really can I don't want to say wring the fun out of it, but what it does is it really makes people feel like they've got to do something every single minute. You can't just go burn holes in the sky anymore. It's just too expensive. So I think that's unfortunate. I was watching a real well-known documentary, 16 Right. It's about the history of the Van Nuys Airport. And they were interviewing all these guys who were in their 60s and 70s, talking about how they used to just go bore holes in the sky for no reason. They would just fly anywhere they wanted to. And I don't see that as much anymore. What I see more are the rusty pilots, the people who are working to maybe fly an hour, 2 hours a month. It's unfortunate. If I had to choose between one or the other, I would take whatever got me into the air more. I would go for the simpler airplane.
Yeah. Hopefully that will come back again, that basic simple flying.
I hope so. I really the LS movement helped with that, also things like that. The place where I've done a lot of teaching, they have a series of sports stars from a Vector, and they're relatively simple airplanes, even with the glass panels. So there is that element to it that I think is beneficial. Anything that reduces the costs, I'm in favor of, because that's going to mean more people coming into aviation and more people staying. And it also means more proficient pilots for those of us who have been here. So.
Going back to your first solo, do you recall how it was after you have finished your first solo?
I do remember how it was. I soloed at John Wayne Airport, which is it's a Class Charlie airport. It's one of the busiest airports in the country, and there are two parallel runways. And when you're flying at John Wayne, you will see and you will mix up with every kind of airplane out there. 757s, wide bodies even go in there. You'll see, and they have two very closely spaced parallel runways: helicopters, aerobatic airplanes, antiques, warbirds. You'll see turboprops. You'll see experimentals. I mean, you name it, everything is there. So you learn to mix into the pattern with a lot of aircraft, and wake turbulence avoidance. You learn all that stuff. So I remember I soloed. I knew it was coming, but nothing really prepares you for it. It's even if you can do it, the guy's always there. There's always someone in the right seat. You could make all the decisions, but there's always someone there. And then they step out. All of a sudden, if something goes wrong, if you get some weird instruction you've never heard before, whatever it might be, an engine failure, there's nobody. It's just you. So I went around the pattern a few times. It was fine. We taxied back. And then I remember we parked the plane, the instructor went in to the FBO, and I finished doing all this tying down of the aircraft and everything, and then I just kind of sat there for a few minutes and enjoyed it. Enjoyed the soaking in the moment, you know what I mean? And realizing what I had done, because, you're a pilot before that, you're a pilot after that, but that's the moment when you've proven to everybody, including yourself, you can do it. And I don't know, for whatever reason, that's just a real defining line. Once you cross that line, I wouldn't say you're then a pilot, but I'd say you've joined a really unique fraternity, and it felt good. It felt great. I remember everything about it. You go into the FBO, they take your picture. It's something very special. In fact, what they would do in those days, they didn't have the security that they do now. They would take you out on the ramp, and they would take your official picture. It was just a Polaroid, but they would take it with whatever airplane you wanted on the ramp. So it was great. I remember the airplane. I remember the instructor, the N number, everything about it is just kind of etched in my mind. So.
Yeah. Is there a tradition like there is over here when you're learning in a club? Everybody of the other pilots gathers after your first solo, and first then you get a hit on your backside by everybody. So you that reminds you not to get cocky after that. And then after, everybody shakes hand and congratulates. And is there any tradition like that?
I don't know about the backside, the little swat on the backside thing. Although that's an interesting one. That might keep, put that in your mind. It's a good thing to remember. Here they have a tradition with, and I didn't do this, but they have a tradition with cutting out the pilot's shirt tail. And I've heard different. I don't know. Have you heard of this? Okay,
No.
I've heard different stories about where it came from, but some say that in the old days you'd fly in a tandem seat aircraft. So you'd be in the front and the instructor was in the back. And of course they didn't have intercom. So if he wanted your attention, he'd have to tug on your shirt. And they cut out the shirt, the back of the shirt, to demonstrate that you no longer need the instructor back there to tug on your shirt. That's one of the things I've heard. But I don't know if that's where it really came from, but you'll see a lot of people do that. So they'll actually cut out part of your shirt. And then, they'll sign it and put the date on it. And some people frame it. It becomes like a little memento from the day. But certainly the congratulations are real big. In fact, I remember on my first solo, even the tower controllers took the time to congratulate me. So I've always appreciated that. Yeah.
That's really nice.
So